Das Kapital by Karl Marx. This is the complete book of Das Kapital, written by Karl Marx. This episode series presents the entire work in full. It is not a summary and not an audiobook, but the complete book itself. Episode 4. Section 3. The form of value or exchange value. Part 2.
The equivalent form of value, direct exchangeability. We've seen how the linen expresses its value in the coat. Now let's look at what happens to the coat when it plays this role. Marx tells us, we have seen that commodity A, the linen, by expressing its value in the use value of a commodity differing in kind, the coat, at the same time impresses upon the latter a specific form of value, namely, that of the equivalent. When the linen expresses its value in the coat, it gives the coat a special status. What's this status? Marx explains. Therefore, when we say that a commodity is in the equivalent form, we express the fact that it is directly exchangeable with other commodities. That's the key idea. Direct exchangeability. The coat can be directly exchanged for linen without needing to express its own value first. But Marx warns us about something. When one commodity, such as a coat, serves as the equivalent of another, such as linen, and coats consequently acquire the characteristic property of being directly exchangeable with linen, we are far from knowing in what proportion the two are exchangeable. Just because the coat is the equivalent doesn't tell us the exchange ratio. That depends on how much labor each contains. Here's what's important. But whenever the coat assumes in the equation of value the position of equivalent, its value acquires no quantitative expression. On the contrary, the commodity coat now figures only as a definite quantity of some article. When the coat is the equivalent, we don't express how much value it has. We just say one coat or two coats. Marx gives an example. For instance, 40 yards of linen are worth what? 2 coats. 2 coats may therefore express the quantity of value of 40 yards of linen. But they can never express the quantity of their own value. The coats express the linen's value, not their own. This has confused many economists. As Marx notes, the truth being that when a commodity acts as equivalent, no quantitative determination of its value is expressed. 3 strange peculiarities. Now Marx reveals something fascinating about the equivalent form. It has 3 peculiarities, 3 strange features, where things appear as their opposites. The first one. The first peculiarity that strikes us in considering the form of the equivalent is this. Use value becomes the form of manifestation, the phenomenal form of its opposite, value. Think about that. Use value and value are opposites. Use value is concrete and specific, value is abstract and social. But in the equivalent form, use value becomes how value appears. The bodily form of the commodity becomes its value form. The coat's physical body becomes the form in which value is expressed. But this only happens in the relation. Since no commodity can stand in the relation of equivalent to itself, and thus turn its own bodily shape into the expression of its own value, every commodity is compelled to choose some other commodity for its equivalent. You need another commodity. You can't be your own equivalent. Marx gives us a brilliant analogy with weight. Imagine you want to measure how heavy a sugar cone is. A sugar loaf being a body is heavy, and therefore has weight. But we can neither see nor touch this weight. So how do we measure it? We then take various pieces of iron, whose weight has been determined beforehand. In this relation, the iron officiates as a body representing nothing but weight. We put the sugar and iron on a scale, and the iron represents pure weight. Just as the substance iron, as a measure of weight, represents in relation to the sugar loaf weight alone, so, in our expression of value, the material object, coat, in relation to the linen, represents value alone. But here's where the analogy breaks down. The iron, in the expression of the weight of the sugar loaf, represents a natural property common to both bodies, namely their weight. But the coat, in the expression of value of the linen, represents a non-natural property of both, something purely social, namely their value. Weight is natural. Value is social. The mystification. This creates an illusion. With the relative form, it's obvious something social is happening. The linen's value appears as something different from itself. But with the equivalent form, the very essence of this form is that the material commodity itself, the coat, just as it is, expresses value, and is endowed with the form of value by nature itself. The coat seems naturally valuable, naturally exchangeable. Since, however, the properties of a thing are not the result of its relations to other things, but only manifest themselves in such relations, the coat seems to be endowed with its equivalent form, its property of being directly exchangeable, just as much by nature as it is endowed with the property of being heavy, or the capacity to keep us warm. Being exchangeable seems like a natural property, like weight or warmth, but it's not natural, it's social. Hence the enigmatical character of the equivalent form which escapes the notice of the bourgeois political economist, until this form, completely developed, confronts him in the shape of money. Economists don't notice the mystery until they're dealing with money. Then they try to explain it away. He then seeks to explain away the mystical character of gold and silver by substituting for them less dazzling commodities and by reciting with ever-renewed satisfaction the catalogue of all possible commodities which at one time or another have played the part of equivalent. But they miss the point. He has not the least suspicion that the most simple expression of value, such as 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, already propounds the riddle of the equivalent form for our solution. The mystery is already there in the simplest equation. Second peculiarity. Now the second strange feature. The body of the commodity that serves as the equivalent figures as the materialization of human labor in the abstract and is at the same time the product of some specifically useful concrete labor. The coat is made by tailoring, a specific kind of work, but in the equivalent form it represents abstract labor in general. This concrete labor becomes therefore the medium for expressing abstract human labor. How does this work? In the expression of value of the linen, the utility of the tailoring consists not in making clothes, but in making an object which we at once recognize to be value, and therefore to be a congelation of labor, but of labor indistinguishable from that realized in the value of the linen. The tailoring's usefulness isn't in making clothes, it's in creating something that can mirror value. Marx explains the mechanism. For instance, how is the fact to be expressed that weaving creates the value of the linen? Not by virtue of being weaving as such, but by reason of its general property of being human labor. Simply by opposing to weaving that other particular form of concrete labor, in this instance, tailoring, which produces the equivalent of the product of weaving. By equating linen to coat, we equate weaving to tailoring, reducing both to abstract labor. Just as the coat in its bodily form became a direct expression of value, so now does tailoring, a concrete form of labor, appear as the direct and palpable embodiment of human labor generally. So here's the second peculiarity. Concrete labor becomes the form under which its opposite, abstract human labor, manifests itself. Concrete labor becomes the form of abstract labor, opposites again, third peculiarity. And the third, but because this concrete labor, tailoring in our case, ranks as, and is directly identified with, undifferentiated human labor, it also ranks as identical with any other sort of labor, and therefore with that embodied in the linen. Tailoring gets treated as identical to all other labor. Consequently, although, like all other commodity-producing labor, it is the labor of private individuals, yet, at the same time, it ranks as labor directly social in its character. The tailor works for himself. His labor is private. But in the equivalent form, this private labor appears as directly social. We have then a third peculiarity of the equivalent form, namely, that the labor of private individuals takes the form of its opposite, labor directly social in its form. So all three peculiarities involve opposites. Use value becomes the form of value. Concrete labor becomes the form of abstract labor. Private labor appears as directly social labor. Aristotle's discovery. To help us understand these peculiarities, Marx brings in a historical figure. The two latter peculiarities of the equivalent form will become more intelligible if we go back to the great thinker, who was the first to analyze so many forms, whether of thought, society, or nature, and amongst them also the form of value. I mean Aristotle. Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher. What did he discover? In the first place, he clearly enunciates that the money form of commodities is only the further development of the simple form of value. He saw that money is just a developed form of simple exchange. He gives the example. 5 beds equals 1 house is not to be distinguished from 5 beds equals so much money. And Aristotle saw something crucial. Exchange cannot take place without equality, and equality not without commensurability. To exchange things, they have to be made equal somehow. Different things must become measurable in the same terms. Where Aristotle stopped, but then Aristotle hit a wall. Here, however, he comes to a stop and gives up the further analysis of the form of value. Why? It is, however, in reality, impossible that such unlike things can be commensurable, that is, qualitatively equal. Such an equalization can only be something foreign to their real nature, consequently, only a makeshift for practical purposes. Aristotle concluded it's impossible for beds and houses to really be equal. Any equation between them must be artificial, just practical. Marx identifies the problem. Aristotle, therefore, himself tells us what barred the way to his further analysis. It was the absence of any concept of value. What is that equal something, that common substance, which admits of the value of the beds being expressed by a house? Such a thing, in truth, cannot exist, says Aristotle. Aristotle couldn't see what they have in common, but Marx can. Compared with the beds, the house does represent something equal to them, insofar as it represents what is really equal, both in the beds and the house, and that is human labor. So why couldn't Aristotle see this? There was, however, an important fact which prevented Aristotle from seeing that to attribute value to commodities is merely a mode of expressing all labor as equal human labor, and consequently as labor of equal quality. Greek society was founded upon slavery, and had therefore, for its natural basis, the inequality of men and of their labor powers. Greek society was built on slavery. It assumed people are fundamentally unequal. The secret of the expression of value, namely that all kinds of labor are equal and equivalent, because and so far as they are human labor in general, cannot be deciphered until the notion of human equality has already acquired the fixity of a popular prejudice. You can't see that all labor is equal until you already believe all humans are equal. And when does that happen? This, however, is possible only in a society in which the great mass of the produce of labor takes the form of commodities, in which, consequently, the dominant relation between man and man is that of owners of commodities. Only in a commodity-producing society, where everyone relates as commodity owners, does human equality become a common idea. Marx pays tribute. The brilliancy of Aristotle's genius is shown by this alone, that he discovered, in the expression of the value of commodities, a relation of equality. The peculiar conditions of the society in which he lived alone prevented him from discovering what, in truth, was at the bottom of this equality. Aristotle was brilliant. He saw the equality in exchange, but his society, based on slavery, prevented him from understanding its foundation. The key insight. So what have we learned? The equivalent form has a mystical character. It makes social properties appear natural. The coat seems naturally valuable, naturally exchangeable, just as it's naturally heavy. But this is an illusion. Exchangeability isn't natural, it's social. It arises from the way labor is organized in commodity-producing societies. And this mystification isn't about gold or silver specifically. It's built into the simplest value expression. 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat. Already here, something strange is happening. A social relation appears as a natural property of things. This is the foundation of what Marx will later call commodity fetishism. Social relations between people take the form of relations between things, and the properties of these social relations appear as natural properties of the things themselves. Even Aristotle, one of history's greatest thinkers, couldn't fully grasp this, not because he lacked brilliance, but because the social conditions of his time made it impossible to see. The truth about value requires a society where human equality is taken for granted. And that only happens in a society dominated by commodity production, where everyone meets in the market as formally equal owners. The equivalent form reveals something profound about how capitalism works. It shows us how social relationships get hidden inside things, how human labor gets mystified into the properties of objects. Understanding this is essential for seeing through the appearances of the market to the social reality underneath.
Next, Episode 5. Section 3. The Form of Value or Exchange Value. Part 3. Join us in the next chapter as Marx's argument continues to unfold.
We've got some amazing content coming your way. Subscribe now so you're first in line for fresh insights and all the good stuff you won't want to miss.